I want to start off this video by saying that I genuinely respect Drist for making his video. Creating a 6-hour long video is a feat that really conveys the effort he put into the video and the love he had for One Piece. And I do think a One Piece centered channel making this kind of video takes some balls to do. So props to him for that, although I don't agree with the way he went about with this video essay or the tone it had. And for people who don't know me well, I'm someone who loves to encourage new ideas and criticisms. It's always the healthy thing to do, and I hate echo chambers. That being said, I have opinions of my own, and I don't agree with a lot of the points Drist mentions in his video or how he goes about with it, while having other criticisms of my own. So I thought it'd be a good idea to make a relatively short video summarizing his points, talk about whether or not I disagree with them, and answer why I feel that way as efficiently as I can. I'm not making this video to slander Drist in any way. He mentions in his video that he wanted it to spark discussions, and that's just exactly what he's going to get here. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. It helps a young channel like mine a lot. And now, without further ado, let's get to the heart of this video. Criticism number 1. Luffy has no character agency when it comes to chasing after the shadow of Roger and knowing more about the poneglyphs. Basically, his problem was that Luffy is uninterested and doesn't care about what it means to be the Pirate King. He doesn't act like Roger or care about the meaning of the poneglyphs, and he doesn't actively search for them. He also mentions how Luffy's definition of freedom was downright hollow, as he is already freer than most people in the series. This point was something I genuinely didn't expect from a One Piece fan. Luffy is a much simpler character than Roger. While they do have their own similarities and they keep getting compared to each other, they are not the same person. Roger wanted to find answers, while Luffy wants to seek adventure and freedom. Luffy is a simple character, but being simple doesn't necessarily mean being poorly written. Luffy is the direct embodiment of the heart of One Piece. Luffy is freedom. He's never cared about the backstories of his own crew from the start, and now you are asking him to care about a civilization from 800 years ago? He's someone who looks at the present and does what he feels like. Luffy's journey is the journey of someone changing the world around them impulsively. If he were more serious and cared about shit, then the story's core message is gone. He doesn't actively seek road poneglyphs, despite it being a key part of being the Pirate King, because Luffy isn't built for espionage. He has a great reliable crew to do that for him. A theme that's been present throughout the entire series, from the pre-time skip to the post-time skip. It boggles my mind that people still don't understand Luffy's character even after 1000 chapters. Drist mentions in one of the earlier sections of his video the importance of objectivity and subjectivity. But in his video, he implies how people who still like One Piece are people in the subjective category, while people who look at stories from an objective standpoint, like himself, would stop loving it, which is one of the most condescending, ironic things I've heard from him, and the main reason I made this video, because a lot of the points in his video is built on his very personal subjective problems with the story and projecting the wishes of what he wanted One Piece to be like, which is a perfectly reasonable and valid problem to have. But I feel like the way his video is structured and how he presents his opinions have a lack of self-awareness of how personal some of his problems really are. Criticism number 2. The unsatisfying gap in the logical progression of Zoro's dream, and in extension to the lore and the importance of swords and swordsmanship. To summarize his problems, he doesn't like Oda's writing when it comes to Zoro's progression as the best swordsman. There is a severe lack of rivals who share Zoro's dream, and the fights you were a part of had very disappointing opponents. The lore of the Mythos swords aren't dived into too deeply, and how even the concept of swordsmanship in One Piece is abstract, as there are a lot of other powerful characters who use swords but don't seem to be categorized as a swordsman. Drist also mentions how Zoro's fights in the post-time skip are too imbalanced, with him fighting characters who are far weaker than him for most of the arcs and then suddenly having these big boss battles. I'm on the fence with this complaint actually. I agree with some of it, especially when it comes to a lack of rival swordsmen who share the same dream as Zoro. Clashing with them ideologically and in combat would have been amazing for Zoro's character and for the series as a whole, and I do think it's a waste of potential to not have them. That being said, since the beginning, Oda put the bar that you need to beat the single man to achieve your goal. His argument about Mihawk being on top, implying that there is a ladder of people for Zoro to beat, is kind of a straw man argument in my opinion. I don't think you need to see Mihawk clashing with people we don't even know about for a long period of time. And I don't think additional lore of the Mythos swords are necessary. The lore of the swords isn't important because it's a backdrop to the world. When you're making a world as vast as One Piece, I find that it's good that there is some lore that is not as relevant to the main narrative. Everything being connected to the storyline makes the world less vast than it actually is. One Piece handles this really well, showcasing other amazing looking islands in between each arcs. The swords are another example of this. It's the Ben's knife of Hunter x Hunter. They're only briefly mentioned because at the end of the day, from a storytelling point of view, it's not the strength of a sword that's impressive. It's the person wielding it. Less is sometimes more, and in my opinion, this is one of those cases. I would also add that swords have gotten lore and explanations over time, and we have been diving and learning more about them. But at the end of the day, it is secondary and a backdrop to the larger world of One Piece. Regarding the imbalance of him fighting characters in post-time skip, people tend to discredit his enemies as if they weren't also strong foes. Luffy was having trouble against Monet in the brief period they clashed, and Pika was undoubtedly the second strongest man in Dressrosa. Zoro beating them without breaking a sweat is an insane feat and gives us the impression that he's ready for boss battles from that point on. And I don't think the imbalance that he says is really an imbalance. Having the same progression structure as Luffy would make the series more repetitive, and this gives it a bit more variety to it. Drist also complains how Zoro isn't actively trying to increase his reputation, but Zoro's dream was never to get the fame of being the strongest swordsman. His goal was to get it for his one friend. Criticism number 3. The way Oda wrote the dreams of Nami, Usopp, Chopper and Sanji are very lackluster. Drist divides his criticism on their respective dreams and how Oda goes about it into individual sections, but I'll be bunging them up for the efficiency of this video. His problems with Nami and Sanji in particular are very similar in nature. Sanji and Nami aren't actively chasing their goals on screen, and their goals aren't even brought up that often after their initial character introduction arc, and how it's not as relevant compared to Oda's treatment of Luffy and Zoro's dreams. First things first, Nami and Sanji are very different characters compared to Luffy and Zoro, which directly ties into what aspects of their character Oda wants to focus on the most. Luffy and Zoro are characters with the strongest convictions, the ones in the crew that have the Conqueror's haki, and the characters with the most willpower. While Nami and Sanji are more empathetic and supportive characters that care about their friends more than their own dreams. Drist points to the scene with Kuma in Thriller Bark, where Zoro proclaims a monologue about him going to be the next strongest swordsman, while Sanji disappointingly never states his own. This more so showcases the differences in their personalities more than anything else. When challenged by something or someone, Zoro shows the conviction he has to his way of life and his ambition, while Sanji is a more selfless person who was trying to step up to protect his friend. Nami is the mother of the Straw Hats in a dangerous sea like the Grand Line with an impulsive, wacky crew like the Straw Hats. She is the voice of reason, the person who essentially protects the crew and manages them. She's an empathetic character who always thinks about the crew first. So instead of focusing on her own goal, Oda wanted to prioritize showing other great aspects of her character. I think making the characters and the character writing as diverse as possible serve the story from a more fundamental point of view and from a thematic one. His problem with Chopper is how insignificant he is and how there's more relevance and importance given to Law's profession as a doctor than Chopper's focus as one. How Law is essentially better than Chopper in regards to everything in terms of character writing, despite Chopper being a more important character than Law. I kind of agree with this. Chopper definitely ended up getting the short end of the stick, and he's not at all relevant for a while now, which is kind of sad to see. But he's definitely not as important a character as Law is. Just because he is a Straw Hat doesn't mean that he would be among the most important characters of the series. Law is one of the most important figures of post time skip, and if you don't like that about current One Piece, I guess it's fine to feel this way, but I never got the impression that Chopper was ever more important than Law. Driss doesn't have a big problem with Usopp, as his journey is a lot more personal and psychological. He even admits to how great it is conceptually and how good it was handled in the pre-time skip. His major gripe in the video was the lack of screen time he has to progress even further as a character, which is what I think is the core issue people have with the Straw Hats in the post-time skip, and the main reason why some people think One Piece has fallen off as a series. And since we're on this topic, I'll talk about most criticism Driss has related to the lack of character arcs for the other Straw Hats in Fishman Island arc and Punk Hazard arc. In the beginning sections of his video, he talks about Brandon Sanderson's lectures about storytelling and the 4 key elements of what makes fiction work. Driss mentions how characters are the most important pillar among the 4, which I believe is a close-minded way of looking at fiction. I think it depends on the vision of the author and what they want to say. Shows like Technolize and Shinsekai Yori are good examples of fantasy and sci-fi series that come to my mind where characters aren't given much importance, but the story is still great because the story is more focused on the plots and the setting. So what was the vision of Oda when going into post-time skip One Piece? The structure of the story has changed now. The plot structure of One Piece somewhat looks like this. Post-time skip has been a section of the story where character arcs and focus is given to characters who aren't Straw Hats, and a lot of the Straw Hats take a backseat until the final saga of the story. For a more in-depth analysis of the structural differences between pre-time skip and post-time skip, check out this video by Mr. Moj. The people who fell out of love with One Piece are more often than not people who don't like the current story structure and don't care about the unnecessary fluff, as Driss puts it. They want to see more character arcs related to the Straw Hats. For them, it's a story about the adventures of Straw Hats. I completely understand the sentiment and empathize with the fans who feel this way, but I just can't relate with it. As for me, One Piece isn't just the story of the Straw Hats anymore. It's the story of Law, of Katakuri, of Fisher Tiger, of Otohime, of Oden. It's the story of everyone in this world. It just introduced me to more things to love about One Piece. It widened the scope in an interesting way for this section of the story until we eventually go back to focus on the Straw Hats again. The Straw Hats do get great moments and their own character arcs, but they're mostly static until the current storylines end, and we will hopefully see their character works after Wano when we get to Elbaf, Laugh Tale, and Mary Jo. Criticism number 4. Oda's art. It's the most common complaint people usually have. The cluttered paneling, the usage of white spaces, the lack of single panel spreads are definitely valid complaints that even I personally agree with a lot of the time. Although the colored version of the manga helps equalize some of its flaws. It's an understandable complaint, but the cluttered paneling is usually used during build up, and Oda still delivers on art and paneling when it matters the most. Oda just simply got more effective at writing One Piece in a way that would make it possible to end the series in his lifetime. It's a compromise that he had to make, and it definitely is a valid criticism, but it doesn't affect the overall quality much because it's mixed with the great art that Oda is still capable of drawing. Criticism number 5. Too much information is given in the SBS and the author interviews that needed to be there in the manga. I will only briefly mention this as I'm not a good person to respond to this particular problem with because I'm a firm believer of the death of the author. I don't look at author interviews or SBS too much. I want to add my own interpretations on top of the story rather than having additional input from outside it. I would like to keep the content strictly related to just the content inside the manga. The only thing I'll add here is how Driss talks about how Oda himself is not happy with some of the decisions he's made, and so should be, which is kind of a stupid argument in my opinion. For example, Tomino, the director and the writer of the entire Gundam series, says he regrets 90% of the entire Gundam he's ever made. But a lot of these contents are amazingly written, so I think it's not really a valid point. You don't have to agree with the content creator just because they made said content. Return to Subody. Criticism number 1. Post time skip character designs. Driss mentions how he doesn't like the designs of certain characters, which I think is perfectly fine. Art is very subjective in nature, and different people like or dislike different things. If you think it's a downgrade, more power to you. I personally think they're gorgeous character designs. Criticism number 2. How was Rayleigh still in Subody when the Marines knew about him being there? It's a dumb nitpick to drag this section of his video longer. Just read between the lines, it's a whole other story that doesn't need further explanations. Fishman Island arc. This section of his video was the hardest to get through, not because of the criticisms themselves, but the way he handled himself with it. He was super disrespectful to Oda on multiple occasions in his video, trying to undermine him and his work. I wish he would have been more respectful while talking about a work he used to love, even if he's criticizing it. I will start off this section by mentioning the criticisms that I actually agree with Drist here. Sanji's nosebleeds and Vanderdecken. Sanji's nosebleeds weren't funny at all and felt somewhat intrusive to the character as a whole, and Vanderdecken was a super bland villain that served mostly as a plot device rather than a good character. I'll be reordering some of his criticisms for the easiness of my video. If you're new to this channel, I've already made a video talking about how Fishman Island arc is one of the best arcs of the series and how I think it's a huge meathead filter arc. Check out that video if you're interested. I'll mostly be summarizing that here. Criticism number 1. Expectations. This is a very common complaint. Fishman Island arc carried the heavy burden of being the next arc after its most intense and action-packed saga. So going into the arc and the new world, expectations were high for a lot of people to deliver a tense and strong arc, and they got something else entirely. I personally think it's your own problem that you raised your expectations so high after Marineford and misinterpreted the structure and heart of One Piece. It was the perfect first arc of One Piece after the crew got back together, sailing through fun and unique locations. It's an arc that goes back to its adventurous roots, and it's your own fault that you expected something else from One Piece. Criticism number 2. The Straw Hats aren't talking about their 2-year time skip during their trip to Fishman Island. Driss talks about how the characters aren't focused on learning about each other's new experiences. I think it's a complaint from a fan who wanted to see more things related to Dragon and focus on that aspect more. A complaint from a fan who wanted One Piece to do something entirely different with its exposition and story. Context matters here. This was their first reunion after 2 whole years. It's more about them having fun with each other after a long time, especially right after they had a deep conversation about Kuma. Even the conversations weren't that long as the underwater journey and its challenges took a step forward. One Piece is primarily an adventure manga, and you can't really blame the series for being adventurous, especially after such a long action centered saga and going back to the heart of what makes One Piece One Piece. The misinformation. This pissed me off a little. Drist confidently explains in his video how Luffy requiring blood because of his wounds sets an underwhelming result for Luffy's training, as even Hody was able to injure Luffy this badly. This is straight up wrong. While Hody had bit Luffy and injured him due to the fight being underwater and Luffy being a devil fruit user, the actual reason why Luffy's injury got this bad was due to him continuously punching Nova in order to destroy it, opening up his wounds for a longer period of time, which was explicitly stated in the story. Criticism number 4. The separation of the Straw Hats at the start of the arc didn't lead to interesting new plot lines. I don't really know what Drist wants here. He explains how separations of characters are usually used to add interesting character interactions or to add new plot lines, and that we didn't have it here. I think I disagree with this because we had those things. The separation of the Straw Hats was used to add exploratory elements to the island from multiple perspectives and to create a fundamental core for the central theme of the arc and to give personal motivations to specific characters like Frankie and Robin. It also establishes Fishman Island as a character itself. While I think Drist wanted the Straw Hats to have individual character arcs, instead we got a thematic and literary exploration of the world of Fishman Island and a deep dive into the core theme of One Piece. Criticism number 5. Hody Jones as a villain. Basically, how Hody Jones was a poor villain and how he was one-dimensional, uncharismatic, and doesn't have any interesting dynamic with the rest of the characters. Hody is weak, yes, but it was shown to us from the start if you read it in the manga. Sora one-shots him quite easily despite Hody using his drugs and being underwater, and it straight up tells us that the strength of the antagonist doesn't play a role in the arc. The true antagonist of the arc was the way Fishman Island looked at humans. Hody isn't threatening, but I find him to be a unique villain when it comes to One Piece. He is somewhat charismatic in his small pond that is Fishman District, but he pales in comparison to the other charismatic characters in One Piece. Furthermore, he represents what Otohime feared the most. He is not a product of racism, nor is he a victim of any kind. He is simply a product of his bad environment, trying to force his empty ideals onto the next generation of fishmen. It would have been nice to give additional characterizations to the fishmen pirates, but I think it's unnecessary and didn't hold the arc down much because of what they represent as a whole. Instead of trying to force tension and create a power imbalance in the world of One Piece, it was definitely a better idea, in my opinion, to showcase them from a thematic standpoint. Fishman Island arc isn't a plot driven narrative, nor is it a character driven one. It's a thematically driven narrative. Every element in the arc is a building block for its central theme. Hody doesn't have a dynamic with the other characters on the surface level, but he connects to almost every single character in the arc. Hody and his crew represent what Otohime feared the most. Nami, Koala, Shirahoshi, and her brothers represented what Otohime wished the next generation of kids to do. Arlong represents someone who's on the verge of being on both sides of the spectrum, ending up hating humans because of his own life experiences. Madam Shirley represents that even if two people were raised by the same parent, they can be completely different individuals due to very different circumstances. The Straw Hats represent what Otohime wishes the world would be like, free of prejudice and discrimination. Shirahoshi doesn't have enough character development. Drist unfairly compares Shirahoshi to Vivi just because they're princesses that matter in the One Piece world. Vivi was a character present in multiple arcs of the series and has a lot more screen time than Shirahoshi, so it's important to look at them differently. He talks about how Shirahoshi doesn't develop enough as a character. I don't know him well, but I feel like Drist values character progression a lot in his stories. But the thing about character development is that a character doesn't necessarily need to go from point A to point B over the course of their arc to be great. Knowing more about the character that we initially didn't know over the course of their story and us changing our perspective of them is another form of character development, and Shirahoshi gets it a ton. Despite her being a crybaby, she was strong enough to hold her hatred in check and forgive someone. She was a lot stronger as a person than a lot of the strongest One Piece characters could ever be. She was even ready to sacrifice her own life for the sake of her kingdom. This bravery and a product of the right education is what makes her character shine. It's how the thematic dynamic between her and the other characters of the arc are highlighted. Shirahoshi is a great character. I think Fishman Island arc is extremely rich and super efficient with almost every character and scene adding something of value to a single highly focused theme of racism, discrimination, and the importance of understanding and learning about each other. Fishman Island arc is not devoid of problems by any means, but the problems don't bring the arc down as far as I'm concerned. It has so many great qualities to it. It's adventurous and nostalgic, it's thematically so strong and focuses on the thematic core of the series. The art looks gorgeous, the world building and the foundation set for things to come in the future were amazing as well. The flashback was masterful, the finale of the arc is really good, and I think it's a great experience overall. I understand if it's an arc not made for you and what you want to see from One Piece. I love that One Piece has such a great balance in its adventure side and its action side. And I think this arc was perfect to showcase more of its thematic and adventurous side. Punk Hazard. Punk Hazard is one of my least favorite arcs of One Piece, so I do agree with a lot of what Dress says here. Fake deaths and bringing back characters is the biggest flaw of Oda as a writer and One Piece as a series, but I wouldn't call it a cause of a downfall, as fake deaths have been so frequent and underwhelming from the start of the series. But this arc definitely has a lot of it. Sanji's behavior after getting Nami's body is also really bad. Gags coming in the way of characterization is always bad, and this was unfortunately one of those cases. The arc also dragged a lot with all of the running around and the body swap gags. Kinemon's sexism contradiction and that aspect of his character being dropped completely was something I didn't notice before. It's not that significant though, you could even call it a nitpick, but still I can't deny that it does exist. Caesar was also a May villain considering all the speeches and moments he had in this arc. Caesar does become a very fun and interesting character later down the line, though. For tackling the criticisms of the absence of Straw Hat character arcs that he mentioned, go to this section in the video that talks about it in depth. If you've seen this actual video, you might have noticed that I haven't tackled individual nitpick criticisms because I'd rather generalize all of his examples into a single section for the efficiency of this video. I don't want it to go longer than 45 minutes. Criticism number 1: Oda and sexism. This was a very interesting point that I had to think about a lot. Drist picks apart this fight, its ideology, and what Oda wanted to say here. In this arc, we see Tashigi struggling against Law, Virgo, and then later with Monet. Even after trying to work hard, she was still powerless. We also start to see a hesitant side of Zoro here. The narrative implies that Zoro cannot cut women, but beats Monet nonetheless without breaking a single sweat. Zoro does look down on specific women like Monet and Tashigi. Zoro having a soft spot for women is still only an assumption, and I don't know whether that's just gonna be fluff or have any meaningful character arcs related to it. Personally, I like those scenes because they brought up a previously hindered towards aspect of Zoro that hadn't been explored before and still isn't explored yet, and I hope we see more of that. You can criticize that Zoro doesn't have a lot of depth in his character. I don't really mind, it's a fair criticism. He's a fairly simple character like Luffy and feels more like a force of nature rather than a flawed character. I just don't have a problem with it personally because Zoro is one of the most consistently engaging and fun charismatic characters of the series, and I'm not looking for some huge introspective character arcs from him. So it's fine for me personally. As for how Tashigi was treated in this arc, I understand the complaint that she needed to be a bit stronger, but I felt like this was Oda balancing the power levels of the new world. Tashigi was losing to people despite getting so much stronger to establish the level of opponents of the new world and to keep the power levels balanced. I don't think Oda was being sexist here personally. I think Drist and a lot of the problems he and others have with post-time skip One Piece are fair. It still hasn't reached the peaks of Water 7 Saga or Summit War Saga, although some might even disagree with that. I've seen a ton of people have Whole Cake Island arc as their favorite in One Piece. We're all different people with different things we want to see and love from fiction. We get different experiences from the stories we watch or read, and unless they're completely infactual, it's fair to feel the way we do. The problem is, however, in the way we present those opinions and feelings. If you present them in a condescending way of my opinion is better than yours, or if you're constantly disrespecting a series, its author and its fans while stating your opinion, people won't take it lightly. I think that's the reason why there's such a big backlash in his video rather than the criticisms themselves. One Piece definitely has a lot of problems. Fake deaths, cluttered paneling, and inconsistent pacing are all valid problems that you can have. But you need to be aware that One Piece has always had these problems. They are just more aware to you because you're reading it on a weekly basis and picking it apart. On top of that, a lot of the problems that he had are very personal and subjective, and you're allowed to feel that way, and I hope people don't get too toxic about that. Other than a few, most of the responses I made to his criticisms are all my personal opinions and experiences with One Piece, and I'm sure someone could debunk what I have to say, and a lot of the time that's because they had an experience completely different from my own, and that's fine. Personally, if you asked me whether One Piece has had a major downfall in its quality, I would say no, it hasn't. But I completely understand if someone felt that way because there definitely have been some changes in the story structure and it hasn't reached the highs of pre-time skip One Piece yet. Different opinions and viewpoints are great. They enrich our experiences and make for better and more fun discussions online. Our experiences are our own and let's be proud of them. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it and found some value in it, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't. I don't plan on being a One Piece YouTuber though. I want to focus on a lot of series as I'm the type of person who loves way too many series for my own good and want others to experience them as well. So expect a combination of videos related to both popular shows and underappreciated ones. Thank you for watching this video. I'll see you guys next time.